Britain's Foreign Secretary David Cameron has added his voice to the chorus of Western politicians dismissing South Africa's ICJ case against Israel.
This week you suggested to the parliamentary committee that Israel might be guilty of war crimes.
I didn't say that.
Well, okay, let me ask you this way then. Do you agree with the South Africans that Israel has a case to answer before the International Court of Justice?
No, I absolutely don't. I think the South African action is wrong. I think it's unhelpful. I think it shouldn't be happening. Now, of course, I'm not a lawyer, but they are talking here about genocide. They're taking this case on the basis of genocide. And, to prove that, you've got to prove that there was intent. Now, I take the view that Israel is acting in self-defense after the appalling attack on the 7th of October. But even if you take a different view to my view, to look at Israel, a democracy, a country with the rule of law, a country with armed forces that are committed to obeying the rule of law, to say that they have, that country, that leadership, that armed forces, that they have the intent to commit genocide, I think that is nonsense. I think that's wrong.
But you can't know that. You can only judge on the basis of what they've done.
Yeah, you can judge. You can judge, though, on the basis of what they have done and how they've acted and why they're acting. And to say there's an intent to commit genocide, I do believe that's wrong.
All right. So David Cameron's dispute with the South Africans was all about intent. He said that saying Israel has an intent to commit genocide was nonsense. Right? He's saying they've got democracy, they've got the rule of law. Of course, they couldn't be trying to commit a genocide. Right? They're a country like us. Of course, they couldn't be doing something as bad as genocide. Similar to it's Israel. It's like it's democracy, rule of law. Nothing to see here. It's essentially the argument he's making. Now, he obviously hasn't read the 9 pages of the South African submission outlining all the genocidal statements made by Israeli politicians since October the 7th, which we've reported on extensively on this show. And he presumably also hasn't read the Prime Minister of Israel's Twitter feed, right? We will restore security to both the South and the North. Nobody will stop us, not The Hague, not the axis of evil and not anybody else. So that was tweeted this weekend. So much for Israel being a state that conforms to the rule of law, right? We are going to do this regardless of what The Hague says. That is not a country which to me sounds like it's committed to the rule of law. Now, I also think members of the British Conservative Party would do well to wind their neck in when it comes to criticising South Africa's approach to the law and human rights. At the height of the anti-apartheid struggle, then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher branded Nelson Mandela, who would go on to become South Africa's first democratic president, a terrorist. And the Conservative student wing went so far as to create posters like this. Now, the poster read, "Hang Nelson Mandela and all ANC terrorists. They are butchers." David Cameron was a student at the time these posters were made. He was also a Conservative, though there's no evidence he had any involvement in those posters or sort of wore badges to that effect, which many other young Conservatives did. Cameron did, however, make a visit to apartheid South Africa. It was in 1989. He was 23 at the time, and the all-expenses-paid fact-finding mission was funded by a lobbying group seeking to lift sanctions on the apartheid South African regime. I thought David Cameron's answer there was really telling because basically he didn't engage in any of the facts of what's going on. Right? He didn't sort of say, he didn't engage in any of those questions about intent, which are well evidenced. He didn't engage in any of the questions about the number of people killed, which are all well evidenced. He just said, this is ridiculous. Israel are like us. You can't possibly accuse a democracy with the rule of law. Now, obviously, there are big questions about Israel being a democracy. I mean, it's an apartheid state. So it's not a real democracy, but it has some democratic elements that look like us. It has a rule of law, which is more similar to Europe than other parts of the world. But democracies are perfectly capable of committing atrocities, especially when it's outside of their own borders or when it's done to other people.
Exactly. This idea that a country, a nation is somehow inoculated from the accusation of genocide on the basis of having some kind of parliamentary democracy is complete horseshit. You can have managed democracies, number one. You can have anti-democratic elements within a society for particular kinds of people. And you can have democracies where there is, in fact, strong public appetite for the kinds of actions which South Africa are describing as genocide and intent to commit genocide in Gaza, which is exactly what we're seeing in Israel. 96% of the population think that there isn't enough bombardment of Gaza over the last 3 months. They want to see more firepower being used. So having a democracy is completely coherent with conducting a genocide. And I think that when you look at the specifics of Israel, how it was founded in 1947 and 1948, the massacres which took place in the run up to the establishment of the State of Israel and shortly after, I think that you can say this is a continuation of its origins as a state rather than a departure from its history so far. I mean, Rashid Khalidi put it very well. The idea of Israel was to create a Jewish majority state in an Arab majority territory. Now, if that's what you want to do, you have to conduct some form of ethnic cleansing. There is no non-violent, humane way to do that within the sort of timescale that Israel wanted to achieve it. You have to deny that group of people who are already there their rights, wholesale. And that's exactly what happened in 1948. When you look at the maintaining of an occupation, the occupied territories of the West Bank and East Jerusalem, that's not consistent with a sort of liberal democratic state. That's consistent with a settler colony. When you look at the blockade on Gaza, when you look at the conditions that were imposed on Gaza before October 7th, the fact that food and fuel imports predominantly had to come in through the illicit tunnel economy because the legitimate imports, which were allowed by Israel, were totally throttled. The fact that the majority of Gazans were living without clean drinking water before October 7th, well, that doesn't spell a democracy where all the people there, regardless of their religion and ethnicity, are free to flourish in peace and in dignity. That is the actions of a profoundly violent state, which doesn't want a certain group of people on the basis of their ethnicity and their religion to live in that territory. So genocide, to me, is completely consistent with all the things that Israel has done since 1948. It is not a departure from these policies. It's, of course, an intensification and an abhorrent one at that. It is a worsening and is undeniable. But it is a continuation of the very, beginnings of Israel as a nation state in 1948.
The idea that states like ours can't do atrocities, I just find stupid, right? It's idiotic, it's juvenile, and it also seems to be a little bit racist, right? Saying, "Oh, the country like ours, they're our allies, they couldn't possibly do terrible things." Why not? Right? Look at the facts in front of your eyes.